Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today where we're going to have a look at choosing Chromebooks with Microsoft 365. My name's Andy Caffrey. I'm a Google certified innovator and trainer and a former geography teacher working in a secondary school. And on this webinar today, I'm joined by my colleague Kat.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name's Kat Lamin and I am a Google certified trainer, coach and innovator. I'm a former primary school teacher who specialised in maths and computing.
So Kat's going to be joining us later to talk through accessibility features on a Chromebook. But for now, we'll say bye to Kat. We'll see you a little bit later, Kat. Okay, so now let's get into this webinar. It's broken down to sort of three chunks. In the first part of the webinar, we're going to have a look at what are Chromebooks. So we're going to dig into what Chromebooks are, how they can be used, and what the key features are for their use in education. Then in the second part of the webinar, I'm going to hand over to Kat, and she's going to take us through the accessibility features on Chromebooks. And so why they are one of the most accessible devices on the market. And then finally, we're going to get technical in the third part of the webinar, and we're going to talk about how you set up Chromebooks for use with Microsoft 365. So what do you have to do technically to be able to set those devices up? Right, so let's get started by looking at what a Chromebook is. So anyone who hasn't used one before, Chromebooks are devices that are powered by ChromeOS, which is a cloud-first operating system that defends against ransomware by default. So in terms of security, devices are nice and secure. And we'll come back to talk about security in a moment. And looking at that security in detail, let's look at what the sort of key features are about why these devices are secure. So Chromebooks have got a read-only operating system, and that means we don't allow other things to be installed on it. The operating system stays secure. We don't allow apps and extensions to modify it. When somebody opens a window on a Chromebook, we sandbox it. So if they go to a site that's dubious, that's fine because it's isolated to that one window. We use something called verified boot when a Chromebook starts up. So it checks the operating system it's using and makes sure it's nice and safe and secure. And there's a review process in place for how we add apps and extensions onto Chromebooks. So we're going to see adding apps and extensions a bit later on when we get into the technical side of setting devices up. And finally, we call it, it's a low on-device footprint. So there aren't many files and folders saved on the device. Your files are saved up into, in your case, OneDrive if you're using it with Microsoft 365. So they live on the cloud rather than being much living on the device. Okay, so let's clarify some myths about Chromebooks that are commonplace. The first one is that Chromebooks are only for use with Google Workspace. Well, obviously this webinar today is focused on using Chromebooks with Microsoft 365. So that clearly isn't the case. Lots of people use Chromebooks with different productivity suites and different solutions. Secondly, the Chromebooks only work online. It's definite that you get a better experience when you're using any device online. And obviously some services, so if I'm using Microsoft Teams to communicate with colleagues, I obviously need to be online for that. But some tools are available offline. So for example, the OneDrive app allows you to access your OneDrive files offline so you can open things up and have a look at files and content offline. And then the last sort of myth is that Chromebooks don't run software. And whilst they don't run traditionally installed software, there's lots of different ways of accessing services and tools on a Chromebook. So they run web apps by going to websites and running apps within a website. Chromebooks can also run Android apps, and for a lot of educational tools, there are Android apps available. And finally, you can use tools like Cameo and Apps Anywhere to virtualize software. So if you've got a piece of legacy software that you particularly need access to, you can virtualize that and put it on the device. So there's a couple of device options that you might choose to use when you're thinking about using Chromebooks with Microsoft 365. Firstly, it's perfectly possible to change the sign-in. And we'll talk about the technical aspect of doing that in a little while later in the webinar. But it's perfectly possible to change the sign-in page so a user or student is faced with a Microsoft 365 sign-in page. Alternatively, if you're working with younger students, you might want to consider using a QR code sign-in. Something like Log Me In from Wand or Clever Go, where a student, if they're younger, doesn't need to type a username and password, and that can sign them in to 365 and also into the Google environment and to lots of third-party tools as well. So there's lots of different options when we're using a Chromebook in terms of how a user signs into that device. There's a whole range of Chromebooks available, from very basic, what we call clamshell models, which are usually low-cost devices that are commonplace in education, through to more advanced models. And advanced models in the Chromebook range are now known as Chromebook Plus. And that means they have a higher specification. And these also include some generative onboard AI capabilities built into the Chrome OS. And so the Chromebook Plus models are generally used by teachers and staff. And obviously the more normal sort of clamshell models and some of the enterprise edition models that are ruggedized are often used by students. Now, what we talked about so far is Chromebooks, as in going out and making a purchase and getting some new Chromebooks. But there's an alternative option that's available and very popular in education. And that is thinking about repurposing existing devices. The Department for Education standards require you to look at whether existing devices can be repurposed before you make a purchase of new devices. And lots of schools I work with have cupboards full of old devices sitting around. So if you've got some old devices, maybe they are devices that are running Windows 10, not capable of taking the Windows 11 upgrade, you might want to think about doing this and installing the Chrome OS operating system onto those older devices. And that's something we call Chrome OS Flex. It's taking a previous device, a Mac or a Windows device, through a memory stick, installing that Chrome OS operating system onto it to enable it to be used in school. And this is a nice cost-efficient way of reusing devices. So Chrome OS Flex uses your existing IT investment, uses your existing fleet, and it just means you can continue using it, extend the lifetime of a device by up to, our research has up to 13 years, which is 2 to 3 times longer than the lifespan of a typical laptop in school. So you can physically keep the device going until probably the keyboard or the screen is no longer working. And that gives you all the features of Chrome OS and Chromebooks, but on a device you've already got. So everything I'm talking about as we talk about using Microsoft 365 on Chromebooks applies to our Chrome OS Flex devices as well. Once we've got the devices, whether they are Chrome OS Flex or whether they're Chromebooks, we then need to be able to control them. And we do that using a Chrome Education Upgrade. And that's the name of the license that we use to control these devices. Typically in the Microsoft world, you might be familiar about using a range of different tools to be able to manage devices, particularly at scale. But in the Google world, we just use the admin console to manage changes to all of our devices in one go. More recently, we brought zero-touch enrollment to Chromebooks. So that means that when a Chromebook is shipped to you, it can already be enrolled in your admin console, ready to pick up your policies, your Wi-Fi settings, your apps. So it's all ready to go out of box. In fact, the box could be given to a student and issued straight away. We'll dig into how device management actually works in the final part of our webinar when we look at sort of technical setup of devices. But for now, what we need to understand is the Chrome Education Upgrade is the license that allows us to manage the devices and makes them suitable for use in schools. So that Chrome Education Upgrade is available either from the person you get your Chromebooks from, or it can be purchased separately, and it gives you that control of hundreds of different policies to customize your device. Okay, so we've had a little introduction and we talked a little bit about what Chromebooks are, but now we're going to hand over to Kat, and Kat's going to come on and talk a little bit about accessibility on Chromebooks and why Chromebooks are a more accessible device. So Kat, we're going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really excited to talk about accessibility. It's something I feel really passionately about. So I always feel very, very lucky that I get to talk about it. Andy's in charge of my slides, so I'm just going to yell at him to move on to the next one every so often. Thank you. So one of the things I really love about Chromebooks is that they were built, or they have been built, with accessibility in mind. It's not a sort of add-on after the fact. It was built to think about the fact that 1 in 10 children have disabilities, that teachers don't feel prepared to deal with that, and that a lot of children struggle because they've got various learning difficulties. I quite often talk about the fact that during the pandemic, because of the pandemic, we've seen a rise in learning difficulties. So my son has sensory processing disorder, and they think that that's quite common in children who are sort of 4 or 5 at the moment because of lockdown, because they weren't around people growing up. So we're seeing a rise in some learning difficulties because of lockdown, but we're also seeing a greater prevalence in diagnosis. So I've just been diagnosed with ADHD, And we're seeing more young people being diagnosed with ADHD, with ASD, with dyslexia, dyspraxia, various different conditions. And I really love the fact that technology can be an extra tool to help support them. We're going to go on to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we talk about with Chromebooks is the fact that accessibility is built in for all different people, regardless of what your learning difficulties are. So again, we're going to move on to the next slide, which is sort of an example of the different tools that have accessibility built into them or are specifically designed for accessibility. And I think that's quite an eye-opening number there. In the next 3 years, they reckon that the proportion or the number of children with learning difficulties and disabilities is going to increase by 150%. That's a huge increase. But all of the Google tools, you can see there, lots of the big popular ones have got these built-in bits and pieces to make sure that they're accessible. And we are going to just briefly mention read along if we get time later, but otherwise we're going to look at different tools. So let's jump to my screen. No, let's do the next slide. Sorry, we're going to talk about Chrome browser first. So Chrome browser is your first stop for looking at different accessibility tools that are built in. So I'm going to show you a demonstration of reading mode in a moment, but also you've got built into Chrome browser the option to do full page zoom. The top bar that you probably use to search for website in the Google world, that's called the Omnibox, and that's designed to be dyslexia and EAL friendly. So you may notice when you start to type in something into that search bar, it doesn't matter if you spell it incorrectly. It will generally pick up on the gist of what you're saying. If you get the grammar wrong, it will still search for appropriate terms. It will still try and find the website you're looking for. And I'm sure if any of you have ever traveled, the ability to translate any web page instantly through the Google Chrome browser is just a big game changer. I've been doing some work with some colleagues in Japan, and it's been so much easier for me to be able to use that translate button to help with some of the work we're doing. And then, of course, with Chrome browser, you have the option to add on various different extensions, including accessibility tools. Obviously, we add the little coder. Make sure you check that what you're adding on is useful and used by other people. If an extension has only one user, the chances are it might not be legit. And then also built into Chrome browser is something called quick answers. So you can right click on a word and it will give you definition, pronunciation, and translation. And that quick answers tool needs to be turned on. Now I'm going to hop over to my screen because I want to show you reading mode. So I'll show you here, this is my Chrome browser. And I've got a page about the Great Fire of London, which to me is quite overwhelming. So with someone with ADHD, this is a lot of text and a lot going on. So one thing I can do on Chrome browser is click on those 3 dots, and on more tools, I've got this reading mode button. Once you've opened up reading mode, you can press the pin button and that places it in your browser permanently. So you can just click on it with one click. Now, what I love about reading mode is if I make this page a bit bigger, make sure I'm clicking actually on the page. I'm not sure what it's doing there. It doesn't normally do this. There we go. Great Fire of London. It's finished. It's loaded up the page, and you can see that on my right-hand side of my screen, when it appears, I have a simplified version of the text there. So it's changed the font. It's made it easier. Decided it's not going to do what I want it to do today. And you can see I've got a choice of different text. So we know that learners with dyslexia prefer sans serif fonts. So there's a selection of different fonts, for example, Comic New, Poppins, all those different ones that can make life easier for someone with a learning difference. Let me just try and refresh the page because it's decided not to work. And this is the first time it's not worked for me. And there we go. It worked for a second. But one of the newest features that's really powerful about reading mode is this option here to get it to read aloud. So we now have the option to make it play the page as well as just to show the information about the page and make it more easy to read. And I think that's a really powerful tool. And that's also going to be built in to do OCR, so optical character recognition of PDFs. So you can scan in a PDF of a story and then hand over to your learners and give them the opportunity to have it read to them and they can follow along, which is obviously quite powerful powerful accessibility tool there, and you can see you've got a range of different choices. You can do US English, you can install UK English languages. I've literally just updated my browser today to make sure I had this reading mode because it's just been launched. The ability to have it play back to you. You can change the size of the text. You can decide whether or not hyperlinks are highlighted, and you can change the spacing. And then one that's, again, really useful for your learners with dyslexia is this option to make it yellow or blue background. And you can make it fill the page, or you can make it just be a small box in the side. So just some really useful ways to use reading mode. And then I'm going to just go back to my slides now that I've shown that one, because of course it decided not to work properly for me. And then as well as reading mode, so we're going to go on to the next slide, please. And the next one again, because I've already done the live demo, we're going to look at the accessibility on a Chromebook itself. So I'm actually going to bring in my whole screen for this, which is slightly more difficult. So let me just bring that one in and show you. So in a moment, I'm just going to minimize this screen, but there we go. I'm going to minimize this so you're not having to see it. But in your shelf down in the bottom corner, you've got your quick access menu. And you can see there, I've got accessibility turned on mine so that it appears in the menu there. That is something you can turn on in the admin console. So as the admin console user, you can make sure that accessibility appears for everybody within this menu. If it's not appearing automatically within this menu, you can add it manually. So you can click on this big settings icon, and this will bring up the settings menu. And down at the bottom of that is accessibility. And you can see here, I've got the option to make it available in quick settings. Occasionally schools decide to turn this off to prevent learners from being able to turn on and off the accessibility tools. I believe strongly that you should be turning it on. And you can see that there are a range of different accessibility tools that can be modified either here in the accessibility menu or in the accessibility menu in the quick access. So if I click on the quick access, just to show you through some of the ones that are available there, you can see we've got the Chromebook, which is one that automatically reads back what you're doing on the computer. So that's for somebody who's got a sight impairment, and that can be combined with a Braille keyboard as well. The option for select to speak. So you can highlight a section of text. So if I turn that one on, you'll see it makes an icon appear down here. Select to speak allows you to select a block of text and it will read it back to you. You can also use that with reading mode, although of course now reading mode has it built in. Dictation, as you would expect, allows you to click and speak, and then it will copy whatever you say into whatever window you've got open. And then this nice one here, color correction, is a relatively new one. And I'm just going to go into this menu to show you color correction, because color correction relates to learners with color blindness and different sight impairments. So you can decide how your color correction works. Does it modify your screen because you have a weakness with red, or a weakness with green, or you need a blue-yellow highlight? So you've got those different options. You can see if I click through them, it just changes the tones of the colors on my page. And so that's just a really nice, subtle difference for people who need it. So I really like that color correction option. The fact that it's just there and easy to access. So you choose in the menu what type of color correction you need, and then it's turn off and on within the accessibility menu. You'll notice that the ones that are turned on are now at the top of the accessibility menu, which is really useful if you have a child who accidentally turns on color inversion. And again, for some learners, color inversion is really useful. For some children, it's something to do to be silly. We've also got the magnifiers. And then if you've got various fine motor control issues, there are a couple of good ones here. For example, automatic clicks. So if you turn that one on, you can see if I hover over something, it gets a little bar which makes it click. So anything that's clickable, you get that automatic clicks menu appear on it. So if you've got fine motor, or even just for very young learners who struggle with clicking the mouse, just giving them that extra layer. And then one of the ones that I quite like is this sticky keys option. And sticky keys is for learners who, again, with fine motor control issues, struggle to hold down the shift button, for example. And what it does is it remembers what you've pressed in terms of those command buttons. So if you wanted to do shift and then the letter K, you just need to tap the shift key, then press the letter K, rather than holding down the shift key. So I think that's a really, really powerful built-in tool. You can see there's various other different ones here, large mouse cursor, so I can make my mouse really big. And again, within the actual settings menu, you can change you can change the color of your mouse. I just went into the wrong menu there. Clearly not paying attention. There we go, cursor and touchpad. So as well as making my cursor bigger, I could make it bright red. You can see that changes the color of it, or I can make it black and I can switch between them. You can see there are various options even within the different menus to further improve your accessibility. And then one of my favorite things about accessibility, so I'm going to go back to the slides now, and hopefully everything is, yeah, there we go, perfect. So my favorite thing about accessibility is that it doesn't follow the device, it follows the user. So if a learner logs into a different device, their accessibility settings are automatically there. And I think that's a really powerful thing, because it means you don't have to be, oh, little Simon over here needs to have his accessibility turned on. Let's give him a special, spend a lot of time drawing attention to his special needs. It's just automatic. When he logs in, it's there no matter what device he uses. We're going to go on to the next slide, because I'm really lucky to be able to share one more very exciting feature that's on Chromebooks coming soon. And this is this new option to use facial expressions or gestures to control your device. And again, this is absolutely wonderful if you've got those fine motor control issues, or even gross motor control issues where you can't necessarily control the mouse. You can't necessarily steer the mouse around the screen. Instead, you can use your facial expressions and face and head movements to control your device, which is absolutely wonderful. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of how to use accessibility on a Chromebook, but you can see straight away there are a lot of different ways that Chromebooks are accessible for all learners. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope that's been helpful.
Thanks, Kat. Great to go through some of the features, accessibility features on Chromebooks. And obviously, if anyone has any questions they want to ask me or Kat, if you drop them in the chat, if you're watching live, at the end of the webinar, we'll allow a little bit of time for any questions to pop up in the chat. But for now, Kat, thanks for sharing, and we'll see you back later when we get to the Q&A phase. So see you in a moment. So we're now going to reach sort of the third part of this webinar, and we're going to dig in a bit more detail to the sort of technical setup. So if you're watching this and you're in a school and you're accessing things like the admin console, this is the technical setup piece for using Chromebooks with Microsoft 365. So there's a series of things we need to get in play if we're going to make this work in the school. So the first thing is we want our users to be able to sign into a Chromebook. And to sign into a Chromebook, they need to have an account that's in the Google Admin Console. But obviously, you've already got them all set up in Microsoft. So the easiest way of achieving this is to use something we call the Google Cloud Connector. And it's a tool that's built by Microsoft to keep the list of users in sync between the two different places. So although we're going to use 365 to sign in the devices, we want to keep that user link in sync. So over in the Azure Marketplace, you can access the Google Cloud G Suite connector from Microsoft that maps your Entra ID users to your Google Workspace users, so that the two systems are in sync. So when that user uses their Microsoft account to sign in, they're brought into the system. So the first thing we have to do is we need to obviously go to this, and I will put links under the video afterwards to all of these pages. But we need to go to this and we need to install it. And this takes you through a step-by-step process in your directory of choosing which users you want to move across and have in both places. I would recommend that even though you might be using this with selected groups of students, that you just map your whole directory across, because there are no user limits inside Google, and obviously having to come back and reconfigure it later because the Chromebooks are in a different place in the school is awkward. So I would recommend you just map the whole lot, bring them all over, so any user who picks up a Chromebook is going to be able to sign into that device. So that's the first phase, is syncing those together using the Google Cloud Connector to sync those users together. From that point on, we're then going to go into the Google Admin Console. So I'm going to just move over here. I'm just going to go into the Admin Console. So I'm here in the Google Admin Console. And actually, I'm just going to sign back in again because anyone who's used the Admin Console knows that if you leave it static for too long, it secures itself up and signs you out. So I'll sign back in, and then we'll talk through the steps we need to take in the Admin Console to get that all up and running. So now we've got our users in. The next thing we want to do is have our users sign into their devices using a Microsoft 365 sign-in. So there's a few steps we have to go through for that. To start with, I'm going to go down to security in the menu. And in security, I'm going to go to SSO with third-party IDP. SSO stands for single sign-in. So we want to do a single sign-in with something else coming into our devices. And you'll see here, you've got the option here to add a profile. So if I wanted to, I could press this button and put all the details in, and those details will be given to you by Microsoft when you're going to do this. However, Microsoft is already pre-configured in Google Workspace. So that's what we used to have to do, was go and paste all the details across. But now Microsoft, as you can see here, is a system profile, and a system profile means that it's been pre-configured, ready to go, should you want to use it in Google Workspace. So that means it's available to me because it's in the top box, but it's not actually at the moment turned on for anybody. So my next step over here is to go into this manage and actually select it for use. So I'm going to go to manage and I'm going to select it for use. And at this point, I've created on the left-hand side here, these are my organizational units, my little groups. And I've created a test one called a Microsoft test. Because if you're going to do this, I recommend you do this with a small group of test users first and test devices first. Make sure it's all up and running before you roll it out to everybody, because otherwise we're live editing how things are working on the domain. So I'm just going to apply things today to my Microsoft test OU so I can make sure everything's proper. And on this one, I don't want to use that. I want to use the Microsoft SSO profile. So again, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the OU, and over here in the SSO profile, I'm saying, okay, so any user who's in that area, I want them to sign in with Microsoft. And I press, in this case, override, because I'm changing it separately for that OU. And it's now set for anyone who is in that OU. So if a user now who's in that OU tries to sign into Google, it will redirect them to the Microsoft sign-in page. Now that's okay, but I want to go one step further because I don't really want to have to do the redirection piece. So next thing I'm going to go is to change the settings for my actual Chrome devices. So I'm going to now go to devices, and I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm going to go to settings, because I want to change the settings on the devices. And the first area I'm going to go into is the user and browser settings. And this page has a huge number of options, lots of different things on this page. But there is a way of filtering things just by typing things in the box here at the top. You can filter things down. So rather than me scroll up and down looking for this, I'm just going to type SSO into the box search part here and just search for what I want, which is single sign-on. Here it is, single sign-on. So I want to change, again, for this organizational unit here, I'm going to change the single sign-on to be enabled single sign-on, because I want them to use a different tool, not Google, but something different on the Chrome OS devices. And I'll press save on that. So that setting is now saved for Chrome devices, which means now on a Chromebook, if one of those users who's in that organizational unit tries to sign in, it will redirect them to the Microsoft page that we told you about earlier. But I want to go one step further, because the problem with that is they're going to be typing their username in twice. They'll type it in once to the Google box for Google to work out who they are, and then they'll type it in again into the Microsoft sign-in box to sign into Microsoft. And that is 2 steps, and with younger students, that's not great. So I'm going to do one more step, which is I'm now going to come back into settings here, and I'm going to go to device settings. Now, when we change device settings, what we are doing is we're changing the settings for a particular device from the moment it powers up. So user settings are applied to users, device settings are applied to devices. And that means that when someone presses power and the Chromebook comes on, rather than being presented with a Google sign-in page first, I want it to go straight to the Microsoft sign-in page. So I'm going in device settings here, and I'll just use the search for SSO to save me having to go through the whole list. And again, I've got sign in screen here, and I've got sign in redirection. And what I'm going to do, and again, I'm only doing it for my test OU at this point, is I'm going to redirect users to a different sign-in page. So allow users to go directly to the sign-in page and press save. And what that means now is for any device that's in this organizational unit here, when it powers up, it will power up, it will come to this setting, it will see it's redirected, and it will take that device to a Microsoft sign-in page for a user to sign in. So we've mapped the users and we've changed the sign-in page to a 365 sign-in page. Just one word of warning around this, particularly if you're testing this. Super admin accounts never use SSO. So even if you put this at the very top level of your organization and ask for every single user in your organization to sign in with Microsoft, it won't apply to super admin accounts. They always use the Google sign in. And so if you try and do that with Microsoft page, it will redirect you back to the Google page. And there's good reason for that, because otherwise you couldn't fix any settings, you couldn't come in and change any settings without access to that. But a lot often when people set this up, they will go and test it with their admin account, and of course it doesn't work, and then they don't think it's working. So if you're running a test of this, if I wanted to now go and test it on this particular OU, I need to use an account in that OU that's not a super admin account to test it. So far I've mapped my users into Google. I've got single sign-on sorted now, so my users are coming in through a Microsoft sign-on onto a Chromebook. I now need to actually decide what they're going to have access to on the Chromebook. So there's a couple of things I need to do. The first thing I need to do here in Google Workspace is go to the Google Workspace app area and look at the Google Workspace apps and decide, do I want to turn any of these off? It's entirely your choice which tools you use. But if I'm going to use my Chromebooks and I'm predominantly using them with 365, I might want to turn off things like Gmail. I might not be using Gmail. I'm more likely to be using Outlook. So I'll probably just come through and just turn off at the very top level some of these services. So again, I can sort of start to really tailor the experience for my users by selecting the things I want to use. So I'd come through here in Google Workspace and disable what I don't need. But then obviously I want to make it easy for them to get to the actual Microsoft services that they want to use on the device. So if we go back to devices, and now we're going to go down to apps and extensions, because what I want to do now is I want to push some apps and extensions to give them those features back. So really anything I've turned off, I want to be pushing the Microsoft 365 version to the Chromebook so they've got access to things. So I come in here and I go to users and browsers. And again, I'll just use my test user group for now. And I go to the big plus button, and I've got the option to add different things at this point. So I can add things from the Chrome Web Store. I can add things from the Google Play Store. I can add things from from extension IDs, and I can just add web links to my device. Now, just to show you what that means and what that looks like, I'm just going to minimize my screen on my device to show you, because my device is set up in that way. So here I am on my device. And as you can see, when I go on my Chromebook here to the launcher, I've got things like Outlook on there. I've got Word online there. I've got OneDrive on there. That's because I've specifically pushed these things to the device. So these apps are there. I can click on them and it will take me straight to that tool. OneDrive is a really remarkable, well-built app, because when you push the OneDrive app, firstly, you get OneDrive that looks like this. So you can see into your drive and you can see all your files and folders coming up. But also, it works on the Chromebook in the files area. So if I bring up my files area on this Chromebook, as you can see, now I have not disabled Google Drive on this account. So as you can see, I've got Google Drive, but I also have access to my OneDrive. So although I'm on a Chromebook, my OneDrive is showing there in the native Files app, so I can move things around. I can put things into my OneDrive, and as soon as I do, it's saving up into OneDrive onto the cloud. So just like we would use it with any other tool, OneDrive is sort of natively there as the file area on this device. And that's there because the OneDrive Android app is installed. Okay, so let's talk about, well, how do we push these apps and how do we get these apps onto a user device? Well, we do this from the admin console, and we do it from the apps and extensions page. And I go to the plus button here. And in the case of the OneDrive, it's a Google Play Store app. So I need to go here into the Play Store. I've just got it. And then I'm going to look for OneDrive. I'm going to find the Microsoft OneDrive app here. I'm just going to ask it to install that. So I'm going to just press select here. I'm going to install that for users. It gives me some permissions that I would accept. And we talked earlier about how Chromebooks are secure because you're in control of what users have on their devices. So this is me accepting those terms and conditions. And that app is now pushed. Now I've only pushed it to my little test group at this point. And at this point, it's on allow install, and that's not particularly useful. So I'm going to force install it and pin it to the ChromeOS taskbar, which means it's going to be at the bar at the bottom of the screen for my users to be able to easily access. So I'm now pushing that out to do that there. Now you notice it's got a little flag here which says Android apps are disabled in additional app settings. I also need to turn on Android apps for this to be able to work because I'm pushing an Android app at this point. Let's just push one more thing. So I'm going to just show a different example of one. So I'm going to Chrome Web Store now. Oh, I'll just revert that back. And I'm going to push one more thing. I'm going to Chrome Web Store and I'm going to look for Word Online. Here's Word Online. So it's Word Online Editor. In fact, that's not the right one. I want Microsoft Word. Let me find the right one because that's not the right one. Microsoft Word. Oops. I should find Word come up in here. There's a Microsoft Word version. I will find it in a moment and I'll pin a link down below. But for now, I'll show you what it looks like when you pin it. Here it is. It creates a button for Word Online. So again, I'm going through those tools. I'm thinking, okay, we're not going to use Google Docs, we're going to use Word. So I'm pinning that again to my bottom taskbar so that when someone clicks that, as you can see, all this one does is it takes me straight into my office area and into that area there. So once again, oops, wrong button. Once again, I'm going to push all the apps that I need out to the devices to enable the device to be appropriate. And I might go through Excel Online, I might go through Teams, whatever is appropriate for my students. The other thing just to note on the left-hand side here is I can do this by organizational unit. And that means if I've got certain tools that we don't use till an older age, because maybe we use Word from a young age, but we don't introduce Teams till an older age range, I can stagger that by only assigning it to certain OUs. So I'm building that device and making it far more specifically usable to my users in that space. And so going back to my slides here now, that's pushing the apps and then going to the admin console and pushing the particular tools forward to the apps. So that sort of summarizes how to do the setup. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We're going to have a small moment where me and Kat are going to answer some questions. And I'll bring Kat back on now to talk through some questions that people might have. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, Kat. We might be getting away lucky today for questions. Actually, I'll ask a question of you, Kat, in the absence of questions. In terms of I know you've worked with lots of schools who have rolled out Chromebooks. So in terms of when students first having Chromebooks in the classroom, what are the key things you think staff need to know?
Oh, that's quite a tricky question, isn't it? I think the main thing is, from my perspective as an accessibility person, is to make sure you know how to turn them off, because students always accidentally turn them on and then get frustrated. And just be aware that just because something's been built for accessibility, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just for children who need it. So, for example, the one we talk about often is subtitles. Subtitles were invented for people with hearing loss or other issues with their hearing. And yet, nowadays, most young people use subtitles all the time. In terms of using the Chromebooks generally, I think it's really important that staff are familiar with using them themselves. I think the one that I find I teach most often is how to take a screenshot and how to bring up the emoji keyboard.
Very useful skills. How do you take a screenshot, Kat? Actually, I'm on my device, so maybe I'll show this. But talk us through how you take a screenshot.
Oh, now you're asking me to remember what buttons to press. It's the Shift search.
Yeah, and the window
and then the little window button that looks like a rectangle with two lines on it. And then that gives you the choice to either take a photo screenshot, a video screenshot, a full screenshot, a partial screenshot, a window screenshot. You can also do a video screenshot with your face in it. And it's all on the same menu. And one of my favorite things about Chromebooks is that it automatically puts it onto your clipboard. So what I quite often do with younger learners is that we'll do, for example, a lesson on Scratch or Scratch Junior, and then they can take a screenshot of their code. I've got a slide open with all of their names on it, and they just press Control V, and drop in their screenshot without having to need to find it or do anything else with it. So I think that's really good.
No, really useful tip there. You're right. A lot of people ask about being able to take screenshots and capture screens on Chromebooks and Chrome devices. The other thing probably to note, obviously, is the different function keys across the top of the keyboard that do specific things. So the ability to adjust brightness and volume, screenshots, and view multiple windows from those keys is another key change. I think for me, I would say the other thing to be mindful of is because the devices just start up really quickly and shut down really quickly, it's really easy just to dip in and out of using them in a lesson. So use them just for a starter activity, or maybe just use them in a plenary sense, just to capture some learning without the need for being on the computer the whole lesson. Historically, when I first started teaching with devices that were quite slow to start up, you were sort of committing your whole hour to being on a device in the secondary world, but now jumping in and out of devices is a far more flexible way of being with learners. So on that note, go on. Sorry, Kat.
I think from a primary perspective, you need to be not afraid. The children can pick it up really quickly. So I have year 1 classes who can screenshot without a problem. So don't be afraid to try stuff.
Wonderful. On that note, I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today, for those watching live, and also hello for anyone watching on record. Feel free to leave comments down below in the YouTube if you've got any further questions, or reach out to either myself or Kat via all the usual channels. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.